I suppose if there's one sporting rifle in America that can be considered a classic and is spoken about in hushed tones, it would be the Winchester Model 70. The Winchester Model 70, simply put, is a superb firearm. The early ones were magnificent.
Few firearms in history are awesome enough to get their own nickname. In the case of the Winchester Model 70, its moniker is the rifleman's rifle. And that's real high honor when you consider all the different types of rifles that came out since the advent of smokeless cartridges. The rifleman's rifle, the Model 70 Winchester, stands literally head and shoulders above the rest.
Immediately following the First World War, Winchester finds itself in the position of having overextended itself slightly. The company had been making M1917 and pattern 14 rifles for the war effort, and they've got all the tooling and machinery spun up to make these guns, and they've actually spent a lot of money getting spun up for the war effort to fulfill these contracts. And by 1919, they don't have a military contract anymore. And so they're forced to find alternatives in order to turn a profit. And there's also this question of, what are we going to do with all this machinery? So in 1919, there's a Winchester employee named Thomas Crossley Johnson, and he comes up with what is initially called the Model E, but then gets termed the Model 51. And it's this very high-end, very sleek, custom sporting rifle. And his whole idea is, hey, we can sell these as finely tuned, customized one-offs. They'll sell for a premium. You know, we're heading into the roaring 20s. The economy is good, so we'll have buyers on the upper end of the scale. He presents this idea, and the vice president of Winchester at the time, Frank Drew, says this is just a stupid idea. I mean, he literally calls them frivolous toys and shuts the whole project down. But Thomas Crossley Johnson kind of has the last word, because in the early 1920s, Remington, Winchester's competitor, rolls out the Model 30 as a dedicated sporting rifle based, incidentally, off of the US Model 1917, which they also have tooling on. And so now Frank Drew is feeling the burn, because Remington is actually selling these sporting guns that he thought nobody would ever buy. So they have to come up with an option. And what they come up with in the 1920s is the Model 54. The Winchester 54 it's a fine rifle. There's nothing wrong with it. It's based on the 1917. This lineage and similarity is very clear. They make a few refinements to the design through the 20s and early 30s, but there are inherent problems with the 54 that come directly from its having been based off of the Model 1917.
You look at a 54, and it's most of the way there. It had some features that we'll later see on the Model 70, including the wing safety. It did have sort of an ugly stamped trigger guard, though, just heinous, just an awful looking trigger guard, which is such a shame, because I think it was a very good rifle. The Model 54 also introduced to the world the .270 Winchester cartridge, which is still extremely popular today. And I think that cartridge helped to put that gun on the map. The 54 did okay, but Winchester knew that they needed to do better. And they did better in 1936 with the Winchester Model 70. That gun has simply beautiful lines for a bolt-action rifle. It's got exquisite bottom metal, and it has a safety that's evolved over the years, but it's one that I prefer, and it's the so-called wing safety. It's not mounted next to the receiver. It's up on the cocking piece of the bolt, and it's a 3-position safety.
Bottom line is, it's a superb piece. It has controlled feed. It had a Mauser-type claw extractor. It was produced in a number of different calibers. Beautifully, beautifully built. Smooth bolt, 2-lug bolt. Everything about it was top-notch.
It just took off. It was something that was well received. It was something that people saw the quality in. It was something that became their flagship rifle. It was the quintessential rifle that a guy would want in a sporting arm. And of course, it had the accuracy, it had the quality of fit and finish that guys look for in a rifle.
The Model 70 really served as a roadmap to what a bolt-action rifle could be. With all the different grades and model variations and chamberings, the Model 70 established that the bolt-action platform was extremely versatile, and in fact, what I think is probably continues to be the most versatile rifle platform ever devised.
The main advantage of controlled round feed, as driven home in the minds of hunters across the world, is the fact that bolt control handles that cartridge from the instant it pops up out of the magazine until the instant the spent case is ejected from the gun. And while that's really important, and we can extol the virtues of that over and over again, what is lost in some of the characteristics of controlled round feed is how quiet the action is to operate. I'm a hunter, like many, who will stalk game with an empty chamber. The gun's loaded, but only the magazine is loaded, so I don't have one up the pipe. I don't want to walk behind my professional hunter or alongside my companion. A shot is not imminent, so I don't need to carry the gun locked and cocked with the safety on. But there is a moment when that shot becomes imminent, where you're going to have to chamber around, and now you're within 20, 30, 50, maybe 100 yards of game. And you can load a controlled round feed like the Model 70 Winchester virtually silently. And you can't do that with a push feed action. And it's because that controlled round feed picks up, grips the cartridge case head, and immediately centers it and shoves it up onto the bolt face. Does it immediately and quietly. If you push the bolt forward on a push feed action, it pops that cartridge off the magazine, but it rattles around as you're driving it home. And that noise could be the difference. That noise could spook game if you're not careful. You won't have that problem with the Model 70.
The Model 70 also finds success in its early years in a military form. And at this time, of course, the United States has an official sniper rifle, which is the M1903A4. And that is what is largely used as a sniping platform in the Second World War. But the United States Marine Corps buys a few hundred Model 70s early in the war. We're talking 1942. And they actually outfit these guns with telescopic sights, and they do see battlefield use. And they're very successful, largely. There are no complaints. And these guns are actually carried forward into the post-war inventory of U.S. small arms. And the Marine Corps in particular makes very good use of the Model 70 for the next several decades, even though it is officially never listed as a service sniper rifle. It is employed in the Korean War, and probably most famously, it is employed in Vietnam.
Carlos Hathcock, a world-famous U.S. Marine Corps sniper of Vietnam, really gave it some marquee time. And it was the Model 70 that Carlos shot an enemy sniper armed with a 9130 Nagant, shot him in the eye through the scope.
Very seldom do I look at a decision and ask what the executives at a gun company were smoking. But that is certainly the case for Winchester 1964. I know that they were feeling pressure from Remington. Costs on the Model 70 had risen. They decided to go to a push feed with press checkering and a lot of stamped parts, and they took a lot of the things that made the Model 70 out of the Model 70. But they were good marketers. They had this great campaign in 1964 where they hired a pretty studly African professional hunter to go and shoot a bunch of stuff and have photos taken, and he was jauntily telling them, "This Winchester's better than ever." I'm not buying it. I don't believe it. I'm sure the guns performed just fine. It was a good campaign, but it did not resonate with American shooters. So the push feed Model 70s, the post 64 Model 70s, the guns frankly became a little inconsistent. And then eventually the rifleman's rifle returned. They brought back the rifleman's rifle as the Model 70 Classic, and they went back to controlled round feed. They made the guns look nicer. They didn't go back to the cone breech. The cone breech was one of the great factors of the early Model 70s that it just wasn't practical to bring that back. But then Winchester rifles started having trouble. The problem was they weren't owned by Americans anymore. And so in 2006, they made the decision to go ahead and just close New Haven, and the Model 70 was gone for a while. Eventually it was brought back in collaboration with the FNMI machine gun plant down in Columbia, South Carolina. The problem is there was a void in the market with the Model 70 gone, and it had lost a lot of its position. There's nothing wrong with these guns. They were assembled from very good components, like I said, good barrels, but demand wasn't real high, and the costs kept climbing. So today, the Model 70 is a truly international gun. It has barrels that come from Columbia, South Carolina most of the time. Some of the parts come from FN, and the guns are assembled in Portugal. But they're Model 70 classics. And the guys who run Winchester rifles and shotguns today are hunters and shooters. And the Model 70 is very important to them to maintain that legacy that dates back to 1936. They end up doing new finishes and models and stainless, and then you end up with white maple stocks. They are trying to keep this great rifle around, and I hope they succeed forever.